Sophia Carter had built her gas station business from the ground up, believing in hard work, fairness, and respect. But as she walked into one of her stations disguised as a regular customer, she never expected to witness the shocking scene unfolding before her. The manager, a man she had personally promoted, was standing behind the counter, his voice dripping with arrogance as he insulted an elderly employee. "You're too slow, Walter. I don't know why I keep you around. Maybe it's time for someone younger to take your place." The words hit like a slap, and the gas station fell silent. Sophia's heart pounded. She had come undercover to observe her business, but what she had just heard made her blood boil. How many times had this happened when she wasn't around? She clenched her fists. What she was about to do next would change everything. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more gripping stories. Sophia's fingers curled into a fist as she stood near the snack aisle, her heartbeat quickening. She had come here in disguise, wearing simple jeans, a baseball cap, and sunglasses, expecting to quietly observe her employees. But what she had just heard sent a wave of anger through her. Mike, the station's manager, the man she had trusted to run this place, was publicly humiliating an elderly employee, speaking to him as if he were disposable. Walter, the man on the receiving end of the insults, stood with his shoulders slightly hunched, his wrinkled hands gripping the counter. His face remained calm, but there was a visible tightness around his mouth, a quiet endurance that told Sophia this wasn't the first time this had happened. And yet, he didn't argue back. He simply took the insults in silence. Sophia knew Walter. Though she had never formally introduced herself to him as the CEO, she had read through employee reports. Walter Jenkins, 65 years old, had been working at this gas station for over 10 years. He never missed a shift, never complained, and customers always spoke highly of him. He was the kind of worker any business owner would want, loyal, dependable, and kind. And yet, here he was, being treated as if he was worthless. Mike, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. He had only been manager for a year, but in that short time, complaints about his attitude had started to trickle in. Sophia had ignored them at first, thinking maybe employees were just adjusting to new management. But now, seeing him in action, she realized she had made a mistake. A big one. The gas station itself was a busy one, located on the outskirts of a major city. It wasn't just a pit stop. It was a place where truckers, commuters, and locals passed through daily. The aisles were stocked with snacks, the coolers hummed softly in the background, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with gasoline lingered in the air. But right now, none of that mattered. All Sophia could focus on was the way Mike looked at Walter, his expression filled with disdain, as if he couldn't stand the sight of him. The store wasn't empty. There were a few customers inside, some pretending not to hear what was happening, while others shifted uncomfortably. A mother with her child avoided eye contact. A young man in a hoodie grabbed a drink but lingered near the back, watching. Walter took a deep breath and quietly said, "I'm doing my best, sir." His voice was steady, but there was a heaviness to it. Mike scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Your best isn't good enough. You're old, Walter. You slow things down. I need people who can keep up, not someone who belongs in a retirement home." Sophia's jaw tightened. She had heard enough. This wasn't just bad management. This was cruel. A man who had dedicated years of his life to this company was being talked down to as if he were nothing. She had come undercover to check in on her business, to see how things were running when she wasn't around. But now, her purpose had changed. It was no longer just about observing, it was about taking action. Sophia inhaled deeply, composing herself. She stepped forward, her disguise still intact, moving closer to the counter. She was done watching. It was time to make herself known. Sophia stepped forward, her heart pounding as she approached the counter. She had remained silent long enough. The sting of Mike's words still lingered in the air, thick with humiliation and cruelty. Walter had just nodded, looking down at the register, his fingers trembling slightly as he pressed the buttons. Sophia had seen enough. She wasn't just a businesswoman. She was a leader, and a leader protected the people who helped build their success. But right now, she wanted to see how far Mike would go, how deep his lack of respect truly ran. Keeping her disguise intact, she stopped just a few feet from the register, pretending to browse a rack of snacks while listening closely. Mike, still unaware of who she was, continued his tirade. He crossed his arms, shaking his head in frustration. "You know, Walter, I don't even know why you're still here. I should have let you go a long time ago. Maybe you were useful 10 years ago, but now—" He let out a dry laugh, looking around as if expecting others to agree with him. Some customers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. Walter opened his mouth to respond but hesitated, pressing his lips together instead. He was used to this treatment, too used to it. He had worked hard his whole life, and now, at 65, all he wanted was a little dignity. But instead, he was being treated like a burden. Sophia clenched her fists. She watched as Walter inhaled deeply, steadying himself before speaking. "I just do my job, sir. I've always done my job." His voice was quiet, steady, but laced with exhaustion. He wasn't begging to stay. He wasn't arguing. He was simply stating a fact. And yet, Mike scoffed, as if Walter's words were laughable. "Your job? Please. The only reason I haven't fired you yet is because no one else wants to deal with you." He glanced at a younger employee stocking shelves nearby. "Maybe I should start training someone who actually has a future here." A wave of anger surged through Sophia, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed to see if anyone else would speak up. The young employee hesitated, his grip tightening on the box he was holding, but he didn't say anything. It was clear Mike's presence had instilled fear in the workplace. Employees didn't dare challenge him, even when they knew he was wrong. Even some customers looked ready to step in, but no one moved. That was the worst part. How easily people let injustice slide when they weren't directly affected. Sophia exhaled slowly, her decision solidifying. She had built this business on principles of respect, fairness, and hard work. If this was the type of leadership Mike had been displaying when she wasn't around, then he had no place in her company. Taking a step closer, she finally spoke, her voice clear and firm. "That's enough." The entire store seemed to freeze. Mike turned toward her, his expression shifting from irritation to mild confusion. He had no idea who she was. He saw only a customer standing before him, a woman in a baseball cap and sunglasses. "Excuse me?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Sophia didn't back down. "I said, that's enough." She met his gaze head-on. "You have no idea who you're talking to, but you're about to find out." The tension in the air grew thicker as the weight of her words settled. Sophia was done pretending. It was time for the truth to come out. The air in the gas station grew thick with tension as Sophia's words hung in the silence. Mike's face twisted in confusion, then irritation, as he turned to face her directly. He let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head as if she had just said something ridiculous. And who do you think you are, lady? Some customer who thinks she can tell me how to run my store?" His voice carried the same arrogance, the same smug authority he had used to belittle Walter moments ago. But what Mike didn't realize was that he wasn't talking to just any customer. He was talking to the woman who owned the entire company. Sophia removed her sunglasses slowly, tucking them into her pocket. Then, with deliberate movements, she reached up and pulled off her baseball cap, letting her dark curls fall loosely around her shoulders. The moment recognition flickered in Mike's eyes, his entire posture stiffened. The color drained from his face as he took a slight step back. Sophia didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. She simply let the weight of her presence settle over him. "I don't just own this store, Mike," she said evenly. "I own this entire company. And right now, I'm standing here watching the man I put in charge treat one of my most loyal employees like garbage." A murmur spread through the store. The young employee stocking shelves stopped what he was doing, eyes wide with shock. A customer near the coffee station whispered something under his breath. Even Walter, who had been bracing himself for more insults, looked up in disbelief. Sophia kept her eyes locked on Mike, who was now sweating. His arrogance had vanished, replaced by nervous stammering. "Miss Carter, I didn't realize. I was just—" He struggled for words, his usual confidence slipping, but Sophia wasn't interested in excuses. She gestured toward Walter, her voice unwavering. "You just told a man who has worked here for 10 years that he's useless, that he should be replaced, that he's too old to contribute." Her eyes darkened as she took a step closer. "You, on the other hand, have barely been here a year, and in that time, I've had multiple complaints about how you treat employees. I wanted to see for myself if they were true, and now I don't need any more proof." Mike opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He knew there was nothing he could say to fix this. Sophia turned to Walter, her voice softening. "Walter, I need you to know something." Walter straightened slightly, his worn hands still resting on the counter. "You are not useless. You are not slow. You are not replaceable." A lump formed in her throat as she saw the way he swallowed hard, his lips pressing together, as if he was holding back years of pent-up emotion. She turned back to Mike, her expression now unreadable. "But you are." Mike flinched as the words hit him like a slap. Before he could beg for a second chance, before he could spin another excuse, Sophia spoke the words that sealed his fate. "You're fired." Mike's face twisted with disbelief, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to process what had just happened. "You're fired." The words echoed in his ears like a distant thunderclap, shaking the foundation of the authority he had once believed unshakable. He glanced around the store, looking for support, for anyone to come to his defense. But all he found were blank stares, some filled with quiet satisfaction, others with disappointment. No one spoke for him. No one tried to argue against Sophia's decision. He had spent so long ruling through fear, through condescension, through belittlement, and now that power had crumbled in an instant. Still, his ego refused to let him accept it. "Miss Carter, please," he began, his voice hoarse with desperation. "You don't understand. I was only trying to keep things efficient, to keep the business running smoothly. Walter, he slows things down, you saw it yourself. I wasn't trying to be cruel, I was just doing what's best for the company." His eyes flickered toward Walter, as if trying to shift the blame onto him. But the elderly man, who had spent years being mistreated and ignored, simply looked back at him with the quiet dignity that Mike had never possessed. Sophia exhaled, pulling her phone from her pocket. "You think I don't understand?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. With a few taps, she pulled up a series of records, complaints filed by employees, customer feedback reports, and even financial losses the gas station had suffered under Mike's management. She turned the screen toward him. "You see this? These aren't just numbers. These are the voices of the people you've mistreated, the employees you belittled, the customers who stopped coming because of the toxic environment you created." Her eyes locked onto his, her expression unreadable. "You didn't just have a bad day, Mike. You built a pattern of cruelty, and I don't tolerate that in my business." Mike's breathing grew uneven. His mind scrambled for a way to fix it, to make her reconsider. He had never imagined that a simple gas station visit would turn into the moment everything unraveled. I can change," he stammered. "Please, give me another chance. You don't need to do this." He wasn't used to begging. He wasn't used to being the one without power. He had always been the one making people plead for their jobs, watching them with amusement as they tried to justify their worth. And now, the roles had reversed. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Walter, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of experience. "Funny how that works, isn't it?" he said, his gaze never wavering. "You had no problem threatening to fire me just a few minutes ago. You called me useless, told me I should be replaced, and now here you are, asking for mercy." His words weren't spiteful, just honest. There was no malice in his tone, no need for revenge. He was simply stating the truth. And the truth was undeniable. Mike had never thought twice about tearing others down. But now that he was the one falling, he expected someone to catch him. Sophia let the silence settle before speaking again, turning to the employees who had been watching the scene unfold. "Starting today, this station will be under new management," she announced. "But first, I want every employee here to know something. This company does not tolerate discrimination, mistreatment, or bullying. You deserve a workplace where you are respected. And from now on, that's exactly what you'll have." A wave of relief passed through the workers, some of them exchanging glances, others nodding quietly. They had spent months under Mike's rule, afraid to speak out, afraid of losing their jobs. But today, they had seen something different. They had seen that their voices mattered. Mike knew there was nothing left to say. His shoulders slumped in defeat as he looked down at the floor. Sophia's words had sealed his fate. He turned without another word, walking toward the back office to gather his things. His steps were heavy, dragging, as if he finally realized what it felt like to carry the weight of his own actions. No one stopped him. No one offered him a sympathetic glance. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. As he disappeared from sight, Sophia turned to Walter. The older man stood still, his hands resting on the counter, his expression unreadable. For so long, he had been forced to endure, to keep his head down and push through the mistreatment. Now, the man who had made his life miserable was gone. Sophia met his gaze, her voice softer now. "Walter, I need you to know something," she said. "I owe you an apology. No one should have to work under conditions like that. And I should have been here sooner." Walter shook his head, offering her a small, tired smile. "You don't have to apologize, ma'am," he said. "I've been working all my life. I've seen men like him before." He glanced toward the back office where Mike was still gathering his belongings. But I've never had someone like you step in." Sophia felt a lump rise in her throat. This wasn't just about firing a bad manager. This was about making things right. And she wasn't done yet. Walter stood behind the counter, still trying to process everything that had just happened. For months, he had endured Mike's cruel words, swallowing his pride and convincing himself that he had no choice but to tolerate it. But now, the weight of that mistreatment was finally lifting. Sophia's words rang in his ears. "I should have been here sooner." She didn't just fire Mike. She acknowledged what had happened, made it clear that he mattered. That alone was more than Walter had ever expected. He had spent years working tirelessly, believing that being overlooked was just part of the job. But today, for the first time, he felt truly seen. Sophia turned toward the employees who had gathered near the shelves, watching the situation unfold. Some of them looked relieved, while others were still in shock. A young worker, no older than 20, hesitated before stepping forward. "Miss Carter, does this mean things are really going to change?" His voice was cautious, almost disbelieving. Sophia nodded. "Yes. From this moment on, things will be different. Respect and fairness are not optional in my business." She then turned to Walter, "And that starts with making things right." She reached into her bag and pulled out a neatly folded envelope. "Walter, I've gone through your records. You've been with us for over 10 years. No complaints, no missed shifts, always reliable. You deserved better long before today." She handed him the envelope. "Inside is a well-earned raise and a schedule that works better for you." Walter took the envelope slowly, his rough hands shaking slightly as he opened it. His eyes widened. "Miss Carter, this is more than I ever expected." His voice was thick with emotion. He had spent so many years pushing through, never asking for more, believing that loyalty would go unnoticed. But now, standing here, he realized that someone had noticed after all. Sophia smiled warmly. "You've earned it, Walter. And I want you to know that from now on, your hard work will never go unappreciated again." A few customers who had been silently watching began to clap, breaking the heavy tension in the room. The young worker standing nearby exhaled in relief, his posture straightening as if a weight had been lifted from his own shoulders. For the first time in a long time, the gas station felt lighter, as if the toxicity Mike had left behind was already beginning to fade. As the reality of the situation settled, Sophia looked around at the store she had built. It was more than just a business. It was a place where people spent a part of their daily lives, where workers spent hours making sure things ran smoothly. If leadership was toxic, it affected everyone. She had trusted Mike to manage this store, to uphold the values she had built her company on, and she had been wrong. But the most important thing was learning from those mistakes. "From now on, I'll be personally checking in on my stores more often," she announced, her voice carrying through the room. "No more hiding behind reports. If I want to run a business that truly values its employees, I need to see how things work on the ground." She turned to her employees, her expression serious. "And if any of you ever feel mistreated again, I want you to know my door is always open." Walter exhaled, tucking the envelope carefully into his pocket. He had never asked for special treatment. All he had ever wanted was to work with dignity, to be treated with basic respect. Today, he had been given something even greater, the knowledge that his years of effort hadn't been wasted, that there were still leaders who valued loyalty and kindness. Sophia turned to him one last time, her voice softer now. "Walter, you're a part of this company's foundation, and no foundation should ever be treated as disposable. Walter nodded slowly, the hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Thank you, Miss Carter. It means more than you know. Sophia returned the smile. Justice had been served, but more importantly, respect had been restored. As she prepared to leave, she knew one thing for certain. She would never let this happen again. As Sophia walked out of the gas station, she took one last look inside. The atmosphere had shifted. The fear that once loomed over the employees had lifted, replaced by quiet relief and hope. Walter stood a little taller behind the counter, his hands no longer shaking. The young workers who had once been afraid to speak up were now whispering among themselves, sharing a moment of reassurance. Mike was gone, and with him, the toxic grip he had held over this place. Sophia had come here undercover to observe, but she was leaving with something more valuable. A reminder that leadership wasn't just about running a business. It was about standing up for the people who made that business thrive. She had built her company on the belief that hard work should be rewarded, that respect should be given, and that no one, no matter their age, background, or position, should ever feel worthless. Today had been a wake-up call. She had put her trust in the wrong person, and because of that, good employees had suffered. But she wouldn't let it happen again. From now on, she would be more present, more involved, ensuring that every store carried the same values she had built from the start. Walter, and every hard-working employee like him, deserved that much. Some battles didn't require fists. Some victories didn't need revenge. Today, justice had been served through accountability, respect, and the power of taking action. As Sophia got into her car and started the engine, she knew this wouldn't be the last time she checked in on her stores personally. True leadership wasn't about sitting in an office. It was about being where it mattered. Respect should never be optional. Do you think Sophia handled the situation the right way? What would you have done? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring content. See you in the next one.